the key thing for this movie was it was a sister relationship. I mean, what they were interested in, what I was interested in was how the sisters come together after being estranged and how this journey ends up kind of healing their relationship in a lot of ways. And just the arc of that, Samara Weaving and Catherine Newton have such great chemistry. They had such good scenes. I mean, for us, preserving that and kind of highlighting that was the most important thing to us.
Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, and today we chat with Jay Prychidny, editor on Ready or Not 2. So, Jay, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, the movie is very cool, very fun, very fast-paced. You've got a mix of comedy and horror. So, I'm curious, when you're working on something like this, that's balancing, these sort of two different genres in a way, how do you tread that fine line to keep the horror there, but also lean into the comedy a little bit? Because if you lean too hard, you're going to remove the tension. So how do you
Yeah.
thread that needle?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of trial and error, that's for sure. It's interesting because, this is a sequel. So there was a
Sure.
movie, an original movie, which I didn't work on. But yeah, it's interesting because I think in people's memory of that movie, I think they remember it as being more comedic than it actually is. It's more
Yeah.
maybe the scenarios and stuff that are funny or the characters that are funny. Because it was definitely something we struggled with a lot in this movie was just figuring out where exactly is that line, and I think people going into this movie, actors, producers, everyone were kind of first expecting it to be more funny because I think they remembered,
Yeah.
so I think a lot of people came into this movie kind of making jokes and it's funny. I mean, so many days of footage, I think, is this even a horror movie at all? It feels more like a screwball comedy, you know? So the footage really like ran the gamut between, I mean, actors were free to do a lot of improv. And, I think they often tended to do a lot of funny versions. And they were funny. I mean, they're such talented actors. So I did end up using a lot of those jokes because they were just hilarious. And yeah, we found that when we watched the movie together, there were very key areas where we found that the jokes hurt us. I mean, primarily kind of around 25 minutes into the movie when the game starts, there the launch of the game on the golf course, there were a lot of jokes, people kind of making light of the situation, the hunters being very jokey. And yeah, it had the effect of kind of robbing the movie of its tension, because the stakes just didn't feel real. So that was one key area where we really pared back a lot of humor, a lot of jokes, just to really launch the movie off with the proper amount of stakes. And then it's not really until we're really like deep into the movie do we feel kind of more comfortable, kind of slowing the pace down and making some room for more humor.
And I would also think that if you stay a little leaner on the comedy, it makes the jokes land bigger and better, the ones that you keep.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it was also just kind of dialing in like what is the movie's sense of humor? And that's something that took a little exploration as well. And we did find it's more things that come out of situations, come out of character as opposed to characters trying to be funny or
Right.
trying to make a wry comment. So that was an interesting discovery as well.
Well, speaking of pacing, how do you balance? Because the pacing is really good. And you also have to explain who the characters are. You need some character development, obviously. How do you balance keeping the pacing tight and fast and take those moments to breathe when you learn who these people are? Is that do you do a pass and then go back and just keep, tightening and tightening and tightening, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that was a really challenge. You're kind of na finding where a lot of our editorial challenges were because, I think for myself, also for the directors, the key thing for this movie was it was a sister relationship. I mean, what they were interested in, what I was interested in was how the sisters come together after being estranged and how this journey being hunted by devil worshippers ends up kind of healing their relationship in a lot of ways. And just the arc of that, and Samara Weaving and Catherine Newton have such great chemistry. They had such good scenes. I mean, for us, preserving that and kind of highlighting that was the most important thing to us, and we found, that it was a challenge in that other people and, some audiences, some other producers on the movie found that the balance was off and that these character scenes were taking away from the action, the pace. So that was something we really, because we felt very, I mean, so we really went through those scenes with a fine-tooth comb, those character scenes, really just paring back everything that we could bear to lose. And we addressed it more because people found, in earlier cuts, people found, well, why are they stopping to talk about their relationship if they're on the run? So our way of addressing that was we wanted to try to justify, why there was a break in the action to allow for it to happen, as opposed to the other way, which is kind of what we were getting suggested a lot. We're like, take those scenes out or cut those scenes in half or just make them, which was too drastic for what we wanted to do, the kind of movie we wanted to make. So our approach was to try to, as much as possible, the surrounding stuff, just justify why it's okay for them to just slow down for a second. So, hopefully we did that well. But it was kind of a necessary evil because we really did want to maintain these character moments.
So when you're saying you built moments to justify when they were pausing, so to speak, to do the character development, that was something you did in the edit, and if so, can you give me an example?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the first scenes, I mean, it's such a quick scene. It's just 30 seconds of them slowing down in the woods to kind of do a little catch up. And that was, that scene came under a lot of scrutiny in terms of, well, they're on the run. Why are they talking? So, there were a couple of things we did. We kind of reordered the scenes leading up to it. We tried to slow down because before they were like on the run and then they just kind of slowed down and started having a conversation. So we inserted another scene kind of in the middle of that of the relatives watching in the club room, and we inserted a scene where nothing's going on in the club room, where they're looking for them on the monitors and they can't find them, and it's like, oh, we've lost them kind of thing. So that was inserted to try to give the feeling of like, well, pressure's off for a moment.
Right.
We added some ADR dialogue just before this scene from Catherine Newton saying, we've been running for forever, just to give the impression that they have had a long time to get away. We inserted wide shots from the perspective of the villains to show that they're nowhere in sight. So it's kind of things like that to try to just ease the pressure off a little bit to justify the character scene.
Makes sense. Well, in the realm of horror and tension and suspense, what would motivate you to I like asking this to editors because editing is so great. I love editing. What would motivate you to really let a scene breathe to build that tension versus what might be more of an obvious choice of, fast-paced cutting or something like that? What would motivate you to just let the scene breathe almost to the point where the audience gets uncomfortable? Do moments like that come up?
I mean, I'm a tough audience as an editor, it's like I definitely default towards fast pace because I love how it feels. I think it's fun, it's exciting. So my natural instinct a lot of time is to really cut out the fat and really put on the gas and just go, you know? Um, so it's a very subjective thing. It's like, I'm really on the lookout for those moments that touch me. I mean, that's all you can do. You can only really judge footage from your own perspective. And, I am a really harsh judge, I mean, not a lot, because a lot of time I'm like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's get to, and really try to, but so it's if I'm watching the footage and something really gets me, if something connects with me, then I'm like, oh, like this is a special moment, and those are really few and far between, but for me, it happened a lot in those sister scenes when the two sisters were interacting. There would be moments that really touched my heart, So, those moments, and for the directors as well, for both of us, we're really interested in preserving that and what's special about these moments and letting them breathe. And so, we treat them like little gems and, we want to put them in and not race through them, really take your time with them. So it can have the impact for an audience in the way it does is on us as filmmakers. And yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of when you're in the midst of a fast-paced movie, I think that makes them shine even more because when you're used to just this kind of relentless fast pace, if the movie does suddenly switch into another gear, I think that's a real signal to the audience that, oh, this is something worth paying attention to. So
And
that's, yeah.
and I think those emotional moments are what make the scary moments, the tense moments, the action moments feel earned because you care about the
Yeah.
characters. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, these characters go to some really dark places in the last third of the movie. The movie does get really dark and very intense, and that was by design, because, we really wanted the victory of these women at the end of the movie to be huge. We wanted you to really feel that this is a major victory and you're with them along the way. If the movie is too light, if it's too comedic, if you're not stopping for those moments to really get inside a character's heart, the victory at the end is much more hollow,
Right.
and we really wanted the audience to feel like they've gone on this journey with the characters and they've kind of succeeded along with them.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's really gratifying to watch it with an audience because you just really feel that kind of celebration at the end of the movie. People are just so happy that the villains were defeated.
When you're editing a movie like this, you got to push your characters to the darkest moments so that, the win at the end feels bigger, but you also have to build really good villain or villains. So how do you
hmm
decide how much time to give the, I know it's spelled out in the script, but how do you decide how to give the right tone and the right amount of time in the edit to the bad guys?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely something that was controversial for sure because,
How so?
well, because, in my first instinct from looking at the footage, it's kind of there's this deepening of intensity as the movie goes on, and the main villain, Titus, goes from being kind of a bit of a goofy a goofy character to being really dark and villainous, and just the directors and I just so happened to be aligned on this. I didn't discover that till after because just looking at the footage, my first instinct is that I want Titus to get really dark and villainous. And for these reasons we're talking about, if he's a formidable foe, vanquishing him at the end is, more of a win. So, that just appealed to me. As the movie went on, there are takes of Titus that are just extremely disturbing and horrifying, just in terms of how he's reacting to situations and, just a coldness that descends upon him. And I just responded to that as being impactful. So that's kind of the way I leaned it. You're kind of like unpeeling the layers of the onion with this character as the movie progresses, and you discover really underneath all those layers is really just kind of a pit of evil, really, and it's not fun anymore, I mean, you have fun with it for a while, and then you realize, well, these are all people vying for power and will do anything to get it. At a certain point, that's not really fun anymore. This is a serious situation these sisters are in. So that was just what I responded to. That's what felt truthful to me. That's what felt the most impactful. But certainly some people found it was too far,
Hmm.
in that the character was too dark, especially in the scene where he's beating up Faith, in the basement. A lot of people felt it was, just too much, too intense, and that it just turns people off from the movie, in a bad way.
Right.
I mean, no one likes to see someone beaten up. That's not a pleasurable, I mean, it's no one's gonna say, "Oh, I love that scene where, the bad guy beat up the main character." No one's gonna love that. You're not supposed to love it.
Right.
But just for, that was a very, very tight, very fine tightrope we walked in terms of to find, because we wanted to go hard but we didn't want to turn off too many people. And just finding that line that we felt comfortable with, that we weren't neutering it, but we weren't, turning off more people than was necessary. So that was something we modulated a lot, even up until the end of mixing. We were still kind of making edit changes for that element to just, really walk that line.
And speaking of mixing, as you're building the tone and the pace of the script, are you using temp tracks? Do you drop in like sample music and things like that to help you find the feel of the scene?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, as a picture editor, I'm always thinking about the sound of the movie while I'm cutting it. I kind of approach them as one thing
Right.
because sometimes when you're cutting a scene, you want to move into a different mode. You want to move into like a sound design segment or a musical moment. And so I like to arc those out kind of right away as I'm picture cutting, and I use my assistants a lot for that reason to kind of help me develop the soundscape kind of with my guidance. Um, and so my assistants will kind of take on the sound editing aspect, whereas I do kind of the sound mixing, I suppose, more of the fine sound mixing in the temp. And I do a lot of the music editing myself on a lot of projects because I usually just have kind of very specific ideas about what the music should be doing, how it should be propelling, what it should be making you feel, or if it should be counterpoint to the scene. I often have very specific ideas, so I kind of like to do that myself. Although on this project, we did have a music editor, Ben Zales, start maybe about 5 weeks after production ended, so kind of halfway through the director's cut. So he was actually a great help and a great collaborator to kind of take what I had done and kind of even elevate it to the next level.
Can you give me an example of a scene where you let the sound do the heavy lifting for the scene versus the picture do the heavy lifting? Does that make sense? So in other words, you're building the tension with the soundscape and letting the picture sort of live in its own space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean that was one of the tools actually going back to what I was talking about in that fight scene with Titus and Faith in the basement. That was one of the at the 11th hour, that was the direction we kind of took it. Because people were kind of concerned there was too much violence, there was too much kicking, there was too much punch, and it was just brutal for brutal sake and too over the top. And, we had tried so many edits where we would just take the fight stuff out. We would just cut it out. And then that didn't feel right either because not enough was happening. So that was actually something we kind of found at the 11th hour was we didn't have the footage, we didn't have the fighting footage, but we just lingered on shots of them not fighting, and we kind of entered into an altered audioscape, where the music starts to get weird and twisted, and then sound design comes in to make it feel, almost like, you're almost underwater or something. For that, to try to just make it impactful, make the violence of the scene impactful, the impacts of the violence, I guess, rather than just focusing on the violence itself.
So your job as an editor is to choose what to show the audience, but also part of your decision making is what not to show. Are there times where maybe the scene is shot in a certain way, but then you end up using takes that don't show as much as to what's going on in order to build the tension? Like what's in the shadows that's lurking, or seeing the reflection of someone in a scene versus seeing their face. And now, obviously, a lot of that's going to be how they shot it, of course. But
Hmm.
once they have that coverage, then you have to decide what I'm going to use. Are there moments where you think to yourself, it's better if I just don't show too much in this scene?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think about things like that all the time. I'm trying to think of if I can think of an example. But I'm always kind of thinking about things like that because I'm thinking about where stuff gets set up for the audience and where it gets paid off, and that's not always where where it's said in the script, you know. Um, so I'm often pitching ideas like this. Um, I mean, like one idea that I had that we didn't end up doing. Um, but is just an example of that is in the first scene with the sisters. It's said kind of right up front that there's abandonment issues between the two sisters. One abandoned the other. And so, that's one of those things where I'm like, oh, maybe it's interesting to not explain things to the audience, to not spell things out, because that whole backstory is just part of the sisters' interaction with them. So we did try a version of that where you don't say up front that there's an abandonment issue with the sisters, and you just kind of my hope was you just kind of slow burn it throughout the movie. You leave it more of a mystery of, well, what is the core issue between these sisters? And my hope was maybe you just intuit it. Just by the nature of the dialogue that they have and the way they're reacting to each other, you intuit that that's what it is. So you kind of know it without knowing it. And in that version of the movie, you didn't actually have it totally confirmed until maybe almost two-thirds of the way through the movie, which I thought was really interesting. It did actually work in that way. The director's main concern with it was because around the point in the movie where it's confirmed for the audience, the Titus, the bad guy, also intuits it for himself. So for the director, it was just like it was a little, and those scenes were right on top of each other. So for them, it was a little weird that the audience is told it, and then in the very next scene, the villain knows it on a scene he wasn't party to listening to. So just the way that butted up to them just didn't work for them.
Is it
But
be,
I mean, I'm fascinated by that kind of storytelling. Is like how little can you tell an audience? Because oftentimes they will just understand something without having needing to be told.
well, you want the audience to do a little bit of the heavy lifting
Yeah,
themselves as well. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
makes sense.
So that's
Makes
why I'm
sense.
always kind of thinking about that. And I've learned that lesson a number of times, either, writers or, producers or studios kind of worrying that an audience won't understand something if you don't spell it out.
Right.
And, I've had that lesson a couple times where like you let's give them the benefit of the doubt and see if they figure it out. And you show it to a test audience and there's no problem. We get it
Yeah.
completely. We don't need it explained. So I love being able to do that.
Well, Jay, it's been a great time chatting with you. Before we wrap up, is there a place people can follow what you're up to? Are you on social media or putting samples of edits, or do you talk about editing? Is there any place people can kind of track you down and see what you're doing?
Oh, a little bit. I mean, I am on Instagram and and X is the Prychid, Theprychid, but I'm not super active. But you can find me on there for sure.
Well, very good. Well, don't hang up. I want to chat just for a second, but
Sure.
it's been lovely chatting.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping, and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.